The shiny key. It was a warm spring afternoon in the quiet town of Riverwood, where birds chirped in harmony with the soft rustling of leaves. 8-year-old Amara Daniels, a curious and bright little girl, had just finished school and decided to take a detour through her favorite park. Her small sneakers kicked up tiny clouds of dust as she walked along the shaded path, her trusty pink backpack bouncing lightly on her back. Amara loved the park. It was a haven of adventure and discovery, and today felt no different. She stopped to sip from her water bottle and spotted something glinting under the roots of an old oak tree. Kneeling down, she uncovered a small silver key. Its design was intricate, with tiny engravings she couldn't quite decipher. Turning it over in her hands, she wondered what secrets it might unlock. Before she could ponder further, the screech of car tires shattered the tranquil scene. Startled, Amara turned to see a police car parked haphazardly near the edge of the park. A burly officer with a stern expression and a name tag that read Officer Bradley stepped out. His demeanor immediately set her on edge. "You," he barked, pointing in her direction. His voice was gruff and accusatory. "What are you doing here?" Amara stood up slowly, clutching the key tightly. "I was just walking home from school, sir," she said politely. Her voice steadied despite her growing apprehension. Bradley's eyes narrowed. "We got a call about someone acting suspicious around here. You matched the description." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "Suspicious? I'm just a kid. I haven't done anything wrong." Bradley didn't seem to care. He strode toward her and grabbed her arm roughly. His grip was firm, almost painful. "Don't play smart with me." "What's this?" He gestured toward the key in her hand. "I just found it by that tree," Amara explained, trying to pull her arm free. "It's just a key." Bradley snatched the key from her hand and inspected it closely, as if it were evidence of a grand crime. "We'll see about that. You're coming with me." Amara froze. "Please, can you call my mom? She'll explain everything." "Save it," Bradley snapped, dragging her toward his car. Several passers-by had gathered, their murmurs growing louder. A middle-aged woman with a kind face frowned at the scene, pulling out her phone to record. "This doesn't look right," she muttered to a man beside her. Despite the onlookers, Bradley shoved Amara into the back seat of his cruiser. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to cry. Her mother had always taught her to stay strong, no matter what. As the car sped off, Amara stared out the window, her mind racing. She thought of her mom, Leah Daniels, a strong and resourceful woman who worked long hours as a federal agent. Leah had always encouraged Amara to be brave and smart, but right now, all she wanted was for her mom to swoop in and save her. The drive to the station was tense. Bradley glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes cold and calculating. "Start talking," he demanded. "What were you really doing at that park?" Amara's small fists clenched. "I already told you," she said firmly. "I was walking home and found a key." Bradley snorted. "Sure you did. We'll see what your story looks like under some real questioning." The Riverview Police Station was an imposing brick building that loomed larger with each passing second. When the car finally pulled into the lot, Amara swallowed hard, steeling herself for what was to come. Inside, the station buzzed with activity. Officers moved about briskly. Phones rang incessantly, and the faint hum of conversation filled the air. Bradley led Amara past the front desk, where a young officer raised an eyebrow. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone curious. "Found her at the park," Bradley said curtly. "Suspicious behavior." The younger officer frowned. "A kid? That doesn't seem right." "Mind your own business," Bradley snapped. Amara was led down a narrow, dimly lit hallway and into a small, sterile interrogation room. A single metal table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Bradley pointed to one of the chairs. "Sit." Amara climbed onto the chair, her feet dangling above the floor. She watched as Bradley pulled out a notepad and pen, clicking it with unnecessary force. "Name," he demanded. Amara Daniels, she replied quietly. Age, 8. Bradley scribbled on his pad, then leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What's the story with that key? Amara hesitated. She knew telling the truth was the right thing to do, but she also felt a growing sense of injustice. I already told you. I found it by a tree in the park. Bradley's lip curled into a smirk. A likely story. You sure you weren't planning to do something with it? Amara stared at him, her small hands gripping the edge of the chair. Do something with it? Like what? It's just a key. Before Bradley could press further, the door opened, and another officer stepped in. This one was older, with kind eyes, and a calm demeanor. Officer Bradley, he said, his tone firm but measured. I'll take it from here. Bradley scowled but didn't argue. He left the room, his footsteps heavy with irritation. The older officer turned to Amara and offered a small, reassuring smile. Hi, Amara. I'm Sergeant Johnson. Let's start fresh, okay? Amara nodded hesitantly. For the first time since her ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. But she knew that she wasn't out of the woods yet. Somewhere out there, her mom would be racing to her rescue. Amara just had to hold on a little longer. The storm approaches. The interrogation room felt colder than before, the walls seeming to close in on Amara as she sat across from Sergeant Johnson. Though his demeanor was calm, the weight of her situation pressed heavily on her. Her fingers fiddled with the straps of her pink backpack as she tried to process what had just happened. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, treated like a suspect. Sergeant Johnson sat down slowly, setting a folder on the metal table. He offered her a small, kind smile. Amara, I want you to know that I'm here to help. I just need you to tell me exactly what happened today. Amara swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she began. I was walking home from school. I took the park shortcut. Like I always do, I stopped to drink some water and saw something shiny by a tree. It was the key. That's all. Johnson nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. You didn't see anyone else in the park? No one acting suspicious? She shook her head. No, just me. I didn't even know the key was important. I thought it looked cool. Johnson sighed, leaning back in his chair. Okay, Amara. That's helpful. Now, do you know your mom's phone number? We need to call her. Amara perked up at the mention of her mother. Yes, sir. Can I call her now? She'll know what to do. Johnson reached for the phone and slid it toward her, but before Amara could dial, the door swung open. Officer Bradley stormed back in, his face twisted in irritation. We're wasting time, Johnson, he snapped. The kid's hiding something. Johnson frowned, his calm demeanor beginning to crack. Bradley, she's 8 years old. She's not hiding anything. Bradley's gaze hardened. We got a report, Johnson. And it's my job to investigate. I'm not letting this slide just because she looks innocent. Amara shrank back in her chair, clutching her backpack tightly. Johnson placed a protective hand on the table, a subtle barrier between her and Bradley. I'll handle this, officer. You need to take a step back. Bradley glared at Johnson, but eventually stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Amara let out a shaky breath, her nerves frayed. Why is he so mean? She whispered. Johnson sighed. Sometimes people forget that their job is to protect, not intimidate. Don't worry, Amara. I'll make sure he doesn't bother you again. Amara nodded, but her heart remained heavy. She wanted her mom more than ever. Miles away, Leah Daniels gripped the steering wheel of her sleek black SUV, her jaw set in determination. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios as she sped down the highway toward the Riverview police station. She had received the call about Amara barely 20 minutes ago, but every second felt like an eternity. Leah had been in countless high-stakes situations during her career as a federal agent, but this was different. This was her daughter. The thought of Amara sitting alone in a cold, sterile police station made Leah's chest tighten with anger and fear. She pressed a button on her dashboard, activating her Bluetooth headset. "Dispatch," she said, her voice steady but clipped. "I need a priority background check on Officer Bradley from Riverview PD. Pull all records, including complaints and disciplinary actions." The dispatcher responded promptly. "Understood, Agent Daniels. We'll have that information for you shortly." Leah's fingers tightened on the wheel. She knew she had to remain calm, but the image of her little girl in trouble was almost too much to bear. Her training kicked in, reminding her to focus on what she could control. Amara needed her to be sharp and composed. Back at the station, Amara sat in silence as Sergeant Johnson reviewed the information in his folder. He occasionally glanced at her, as if trying to gauge her emotional state. "You're doing great, Amara," he said softly. "Just hang in there a little longer, okay?" Before she could respond, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't Bradley. Instead, a tall woman in a sleek suit with sharp eyes stepped inside. Her presence filled the room, commanding immediate attention. Amara's face lit up. "Mom." Leah crossed the room in 2 quick strides, kneeling in front of her daughter and pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "You're safe now." For the first time since the ordeal began, Amara let her tears fall. She clung to her mother, her small frame trembling. Leah stroked her hair gently, her heart breaking at the sight of her brave little girl so shaken. After a moment, Leah stood and turned to Sergeant Johnson. "Thank you for keeping her safe," she said, her tone firm but appreciative. "Now, I need to know exactly what's going on here." Johnson nodded, standing respectfully. "Of course, Agent Daniels. Let's step into the hallway." As Lee and Johnson exited the room, Amara sat quietly, her tears subsiding. She trusted her mother to handle the situation. Leah Daniels was a force to be reckoned with, and Amara knew she wouldn't let anything happen to her. In the hallway, Johnson recounted the events leading up to Amara's arrest. Leah listened intently, her face an unreadable mask of calm. When Johnson finished, she took a deep breath. "Thank you for your honesty, Sergeant. I appreciate you stepping in to de-escalate." Johnson nodded. "Bradley's methods are questionable, to say the least. I didn't feel right about his approach." Leah's expression darkened. "I've already initiated an investigation into Officer Bradley's conduct. This isn't the first time I've dealt with officers who abuse their authority. It won't end well for him." As if summoned by their conversation, Bradley appeared at the end of the hallway, his smug expression intact. "Agent Daniels," he drawled, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Welcome to our humble station." Leah turned to face him, her eyes like steel. "Officer Bradley," she said coldly, "I've reviewed enough of your record to know exactly what kind of man you are. We'll be discussing your actions today in detail." Bradley's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You think you can come in here and take over my station?" Leah took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. "This stopped being your station the moment you decided to target an innocent child. I suggest you tread carefully, officer." The tension between them crackled like electricity. Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, another voice cut through the hallway. "Agent Daniels." Leah turned to see a man in a dark suit approaching. He held out a badge. "Federal Marshal Carter. I've been assigned to assist you with this case." Leah nodded, grateful for the backup. "Good timing, Marshal. Let's get to work." Bradley's smugness evaporated completely as the Marshal joined Leah. He knew the walls were closing in, and for the first time, he looked genuinely nervous. In the conference room, Leah and the Marshal reviewed the complaints against Bradley, while Amara waited nearby with Sergeant Johnson. The picture they painted was damning. A pattern of excessive force, racial profiling, and misconduct that had gone unchecked for far too long. Leah's jaw tightened as she read through the files. "This ends today," she muttered. The Marshal nodded. "Agreed. Let's make sure he never has the chance to do this again." Leah glanced toward the room where Amara was waiting, her resolve hardening. She had come to fight for her daughter, but now she was fighting for justice, for every person who had been wronged by Officer Bradley. The Keys Mystery. Amara sat on the bench outside the interrogation room, her small feet swinging nervously as she waited. Though her mother's arrival had brought her a sense of relief, the weight of the day's events still hung heavy on her young shoulders. The station, with its cold walls and constant buzz of activity, felt like a foreign and unfriendly place. She hugged her pink backpack to her chest, her fingers brushing against its zipper as if the familiar texture could comfort her. Across the room, Sergeant Johnson stood by the water cooler, keeping a watchful eye on Amara. His calm demeanor helped ease some of her anxiety, but she couldn't shake the memory of Officer Bradley's harsh voice and accusing glare. "Are you okay, kiddo?" Johnson finally asked, his voice kind and warm. Amara nodded hesitantly. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." Johnson crouched down to her level, offering her a reassuring smile. "You'll be home soon. Your mom's here now, and trust me, she's got everything under control." Amara glanced at the closed conference room door where her mother was meeting with the federal marshal. "My mom's really strong," she said softly. "She always says that I should never give up, no matter how scary things get." Johnson's smile widened. "She's a smart woman. Sounds like she taught you well." Amara nodded, but her mind wandered back to the silver key that had started everything. It was still in Officer Bradley's possession, and she couldn't help but wonder why he had reacted so strongly to it. It was just a key, wasn't it? Or was there something more to it? Inside the conference room, Leah Daniels and Marshall Carter were sifting through Bradley's personnel file. The evidence of misconduct was overwhelming. Excessive force complaints, allegations of bias, and a troubling pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals. Leah's sharp eyes scanned each document with practiced precision, her mind piecing together the puzzle. "Officer Bradley has a history of this kind of behavior," Carter said, flipping through a stack of reports. "But he's managed to avoid any serious consequences. Either someone's been protecting him, or he's very good at covering his tracks." Leah leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. People like Bradley thrive in environments where accountability is weak. They prey on the vulnerable because they think no one will stand up to them. Carter nodded. "Unfortunately, that's all too common. But this time, he picked the wrong person to mess with." Leah's lips curved into a tight, determined smile. "Exactly. And I want to know why he was so fixated on my daughter and that key." Carter raised an eyebrow. "The key. You think it's significant?" Leah tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Bradley treated it like evidence, but Amara said she just found it in the park. If it's connected to something bigger, I need to know." Carter nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll have my team look into it. If there's anything to that key, we'll find out." Meanwhile, Bradley paced in a back office, his agitation clear. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, and his jaw was clenched as he muttered under his breath. The smug confidence he had displayed earlier was now replaced with unease. A younger officer entered the room cautiously, holding a clipboard. "Sir, are you okay? You've been pacing for a while." Bradley shot him a glare. "I'm fine," he snapped, though his tone betrayed his frustration. He glanced at the clipboard in the officer's hand. "What's that?" "It's the report on the key," the younger officer said, handing it over. "I ran a check like you asked." Bradley snatched the clipboard and scanned the report. His eyes widened slightly, though he quickly masked his reaction. "You didn't mention this to anyone, did you?" The younger officer hesitated. "No, sir. But is everything." "Keep it that way," Bradley interrupted sharply. "This doesn't leave this room." "Understood." The officer nodded reluctantly. "Understood." Bradley dismissed him with a wave and stared at the report in his hands. The key wasn't just any ordinary object. It was linked to an ongoing investigation involving stolen property from a high-profile case. He cursed under his breath. If this information came to light, it could jeopardize everything. Back in the hallway, Amara's curiosity got the better of her. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching before quietly unzipping her backpack. She pulled out a small notebook and pencil, items she always carried with her for doodling. Instead of drawing, she began writing down everything she remembered about the key, the engravings, its size, and where she had found it. "What are you working on?" Johnson asked, returning to her side with a fresh bottle of water. Amara quickly closed the notebook, her cheeks flushing. "Just writing about the key," she admitted. "It's probably nothing, but it felt special." Johnson tilted his head, intrigued. "Special how?" Amara hesitated. "I don't know. When I picked it up, I thought it was just cool looking. But now, I think it might be important." Johnson smiled gently. "You're pretty sharp for an 8-year-old. Most kids would have just forgotten about it." Amara shrugged. "My mom says to always pay attention to little things. They can tell big stories." Johnson chuckled. "She's right about that." Before they could continue their conversation, the conference room door opened, and Leah stepped out with Marshall Carter. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes softened as they landed on Amara. "Come here, sweetheart," Leah said, crouching down as Amara ran into her arms. "Are we going home now?" Amara asked hopefully. Leah brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Not just yet, baby, but soon. I promise." Leah glanced at Johnson. "Can I have a moment with my daughter?" Johnson nodded, stepping back to give them space. Leah guided Amara to a quieter corner of the station and knelt down to meet her eye level. "Amara," she began gently, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the key. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small." Amara nodded, her young mind racing as she recounted the details: the shiny surface, the strange engravings, and the spot where she had found it near the oak tree. Leah listened intently, her sharp mind filing away each piece of information. "Good job, baby," Leah said, giving her a reassuring smile. "You've been so brave today." Amara hesitated. "Mom, is the key bad? Did I do something wrong?" Leah's heart ached at the worry in her daughter's voice. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. But I think the key might be connected to something bigger. I'm going to figure it out, okay?" Amara nodded, trusting her mother completely. "Okay, Mom." As Leah stood, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen and frowned. It was a message from one of her contacts in the FBI. "Key linked to stolen artifacts case. Handle with care." Leah's jaw tightened as she pocketed her phone. She glanced toward the back office where Bradley had disappeared. Whatever game he was playing, she was determined to expose it and to protect her daughter at all costs. Threads of the truth. Leah Daniels stood in the bustling hallway of the Riverview police station, her mind racing. The message on her phone confirmed her suspicion. The key Amara had found was no ordinary trinket. It was connected to a high-profile case involving stolen artifacts, an investigation Leah herself had briefly encountered months ago. Now that seemingly distant case was suddenly, inexplicably, intertwined with her daughter's innocent discovery. Leah glanced toward the back office where Officer Bradley had holed himself up. His nervous pacing and volatile behavior earlier now made perfect sense. He wasn't just overzealous. He was hiding something. But what? "Marshall Carter," Leah said, turning to her federal colleague, "we need to secure that key. Whatever it's connected to, Bradley is desperate to keep it under wraps." Carter nodded, his expression grave. "Agreed. I'll have one of my team members retrieve it. Meanwhile, I suggest you keep your daughter close. If this key is as significant as it seems, she might be in more danger than we realize." Leah's jaw tightened. The thought of Amara being in harm's way ignited a protective fire within her. "I'll keep her safe," she promised. "But we need to act fast. Bradley won't stay quiet for long." Amara sat quietly in the station's break room, swinging her feet as Sergeant Johnson sat across from her, trying to keep her distracted. He had brought her a small cup of hot cocoa from the staff kitchen, and though she appreciated the gesture, her thoughts were elsewhere. "Sergeant," she said after a long silence, "why would a grown-up care so much about a little key?" Johnson leaned back in his chair, considering her question. "Well, sometimes little things can mean a lot, especially if they're connected to something important. People get scared when they think someone might take something away from them, even if it's just a key." Amara frowned, tracing the edge of her cup. "But I didn't take anything. I just found it." "I know, kiddo," Johnson said, his voice gentle. "And your mom knows too. She's going to figure this out. Trust her." Amara nodded, but her curiosity about the key refused to fade. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her notebook, flipping to a blank page. "Do you think it's okay if I draw it? The key, I mean." Johnson smiled. "I think that's a great idea." With her pencil in hand, Amara carefully sketched the key from memory. She included every detail she could recall: the intricate engravings, the smooth edges, and the small loop at the top. As she worked, the act of drawing seemed to calm her nerves, even as questions continued to swirl in her mind. In the back office, Bradley's frustration was mounting. He had managed to stall the younger officers and keep the details of the key under wraps, but he knew his time was running out. Leah Daniels and the federal marshal weren't going to back off, and the more they dug, the more likely they were to uncover the truth. Bradley pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed a number. After a few rings, a voice on the other end answered. "This better be important," the voice said, gruff and impatient. "It's about the key," Bradley hissed, lowering his voice. "Someone's onto it. An FBI agent. Her kid found it in the park." There was a pause on the other end. "The key. Are you sure?" "Positive," Bradley snapped. "And now the feds are crawling all over me. If they figure out what it's for—" "Relax," the voice interrupted. "They won't. Just stick to the plan and keep your mouth shut. If you panic, you'll blow everything." Bradley gritted his teeth. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one under their microscope." The voice chuckled darkly. "And you're not the one they'll come after if this gets out. Remember that." The call ended abruptly, leaving Bradley staring at his phone with a mixture of anger and fear. He shoved it back into his pocket and sat down heavily, his mind racing. He needed a way out, but every option seemed to lead to the same conclusion: disaster. Leah re-entered the break room, her eyes softening as she saw Amara engrossed in her drawing. She crouched beside her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hey, sweetheart," Leah said, her voice warm. "What are you working on?" Amara held up her notebook proudly. "I drew the key. I thought maybe it could help." Leah studied the sketch, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's attention to detail. The drawing was remarkably accurate, even down to the tiny engravings on the key's surface. But it wasn't just a drawing, it was a clue. "This is amazing, Amara," Leah said, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "You're so smart. You've helped me more than you know." Amara beamed, but her expression quickly turned serious. "Mom, why is the key so important? Did I do something wrong by picking it up?" Leah shook her head firmly. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. The key is just part of something bigger, and some people don't like it when others find their secrets." Amara nodded, seeming to accept her mother's explanation. "Are you going to catch the bad guy?" Leah smiled, her resolve hardening. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Marshal Carter stepped into the break room, his face set with grim determination. "Agent Daniels," he said, "we've got confirmation. The key is tied to the stolen artifacts case. Specifically, it's believed to unlock a safety deposit box containing critical evidence." Leah's mind raced. "And Bradley, where does he fit into this?" Carter's expression darkened. "That's what we're trying to figure out. But if he's connected to the case, he's more than just a rogue cop. He's working with someone." Leah nodded, her protective instincts sharpening. "We need to secure Amara. If Bradley's desperate enough to cover his tracks, He might try something reckless. Carter agreed. We've already stationed an agent outside the building as backup. But I think it's time we confronted Bradley directly. Leah's eyes narrowed. Let's do it. Bradley's office door swung open, and Leah entered with Carter close behind. Bradley looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to barely concealed annoyance. "What do you want now?" he barked. Leah stepped forward, her presence commanding. "The key. Where is it?" Bradley's lips twitched into a smirk. "It's evidence. It's being processed." "Cut the act," Carter interjected. "We know exactly what that key is and what it's connected to. If you think you can stonewall a federal investigation, you're sorely mistaken." Bradley's facade cracked for a split second before he recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Leah leaned in, her voice icy. "I've dealt with people like you before, Bradley. You think you're untouchable because you've gotten away with this for so long. But let me make one thing clear. This ends today." Bradley's smirk faltered completely, replaced by a flicker of fear. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Carter's phone buzzed. The marshal glanced at the screen, and then at Leah. "We've got a problem," he said. "Our backup agent outside just reported movement. Someone's watching the station." Leah's heart clenched. She knew in her gut that the key's secrets were bigger than she had imagined, and that the fight to protect her daughter and uncover the truth was far from over. Unraveling the web. The revelation that someone was watching the station sent a ripple of urgency through Leah Daniels and Marshall Carter. Leah's mind raced, her maternal instincts roaring to the surface. She glanced toward the break room where her daughter, Amara, sat quietly, blissfully unaware of the potential danger. "We need eyes on whoever is outside," Leah said, her voice calm but steely. "If they're connected to this, we're not just dealing with Bradley anymore. This could be much bigger." Carter nodded and gestured to one of his team members, a tall agent with a tactical demeanor. "Agent Monroe, get outside and identify the watcher." Discreetly. Monroe nodded, already heading toward the side exit. Carter turned back to Leah. "We need to move quickly. If whoever's out there is working with Bradley, they could be planning to destroy evidence or worse." Leah didn't need the warning. She had seen enough criminal operations unravel from within to know how desperate people could act when backed into a corner. Her focus was sharp as a blade. "Let's lock this place down. No one comes in or out without clearance, and we need to isolate Bradley." Carter raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll break?" Leah's eyes hardened as she glanced toward Bradley, who was still seated at his desk, pretending to shuffle papers. "He's already unraveling. We just need to push him a little further." Amara, still in the break room with Sergeant Johnson, noticed the shift in atmosphere. The station, once bustling with activity, had grown quieter, the tension palpable. Johnson's normally relaxed demeanor was now guarded, his eyes constantly darting toward the hallway. "Sergeant," Amara said hesitantly, "is everything okay?" Johnson forced the smile, kneeling beside her. "Everything's fine, kiddo. Your mom's just making sure everything's sorted out." Amara nodded, but she wasn't convinced. She clutched her notebook, her sketch of the key folded neatly inside. She wanted to believe Johnson's reassuring words, but something deep in her gut told her that the situation was far from fine. Outside, Agent Monroe moved swiftly but carefully, circling the station to locate the watcher. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few patrol cars and the dark SUV Leah had arrived in. Monroe's sharp eyes scanned the area, looking for anything out of place. It didn't take long to spot the vehicle, a black sedan with tinted windows parked just across the street. Its engine was off, but the faint glow of a phone screen illuminated the driver's face. Monroe's training kicked in as he approached from a blind spot, his movements silent and deliberate. Peering through the passenger window, Monroe got a clear look at the driver. The man was middle-aged, with sharp features and a nervous energy. He was speaking into a phone, his voice too low to hear. Monroe pulled back and radioed Carter. Found him, Monroe whispered. Mid-40s, Caucasian male, sitting in a black sit-in. Looks like he's on the phone. What's the play? Carter's voice crackled over the earpiece. Hold position. We're coming to you. Inside the station, Leah and Carter decided it was time to confront Bradley directly. They entered his office together, their combined presence suffocating the already anxious officer. Bradley glanced up, his hands fidgeting with a pen. What now? He snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier bravado. Leah crossed her arms, her tone as sharp as glass. Cut the act, Bradley. We know the key is tied to a stolen artifacts case, and we know you've been stalling. The question is, why? Bradley scoffed, leaning back in his chair. You're fishing. You don't have anything on me. Carter stepped forward, his expression calm but deadly serious. We have enough to connect you to misconduct, obstruction, and potentially aiding and abetting a criminal operation. You can cooperate now and save yourself, or we'll bury you in this. Bradley's facade cracked slightly, his jaw tightening. I don't know what you're talking about. Leah's patience wore thin. She placed both hands on his desk, leaning in so their faces were mere inches apart. You think you're untouchable, that you can intimidate my daughter, manipulate evidence, and walk away. Let me tell you something, Bradley. Your world is about to collapse, and when it does, you'll wish you had done the right thing. Bradley's eyes darted nervously between Leah and Carter. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Before he could respond, Carter's radio buzzed. Marshal, this is Monroe. The watcher is armed, requesting backup. Leah's head snapped toward Carter, her instincts flaring. Stay with him, she ordered, pointing at Bradley. I'm going to Amara. Carter nodded, motioning for another officer to assist him as Leah sprinted toward the break room. In the break room, Amara's sense of unease grew stronger. She set her cup of cocoa down and looked up at Johnson. Sergeant, where's my mom? Johnson smiled again. But before he could answer, the door burst open, and Leah rushed in. Her eyes immediately found Amara, and her relief was palpable. Amara, come here, Leah said, her tone firm but gentle. Amara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her notebook and ran to her mother, who crouched down to scoop her into a protective embrace. What's happening, Mom? Amara asked, her voice small. Leah brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. It's okay, baby. We're just being careful. Stay close to me, all right? Amara nodded, her trust in her mother unwavering. Outside, Monroe maintained his position near the sit-in, watching as the men inside grew increasingly agitated. The driver glanced around nervously, clearly sensing he was being watched. Monroe's grip tightened on his weapon as the man reached into the glove compartment. Before Monroe could act, the station's front door opened, and Carter stepped out with 2 additional agents. They moved quickly toward Monroe's position, their presence forcing the driver's hand. The man started the engine, but before he could drive off, Monroe stepped into his line of sight, weapon drawn. FBI. Shut off the engine and step out of the vehicle. The driver froze, his eyes wide with panic. Slowly, he raised his hands and complied, exiting the car with his phone still in hand. Carter and the other agents moved in, securing the man and retrieving the phone. What's your name? Carter demanded. The man hesitated before muttering, Alan Myers. Alan Myers, Carter repeated, his tone icy. Let's see what you've been up to. Carter scanned the phone, his expression darkening as he reviewed the call logs and messages. He handed the device to Monroe, who raised an eyebrow. It's all here, Carter said grimly. Messages to Bradley. Instructions about the key. This guy's their handler. Back inside, Leah stood protectively near Amara, her mind racing as Carter and Monroe returned. Carter pulled her aside, his face set in stone. We've got the guy outside. He's connected to Bradley, and the messages on his phone confirm it. They're part of a ring smuggling stolen artifacts. Leah's fists clenched, And the key? Carter nodded. It unlocks a safety deposit box containing evidence of their operation. That's why they're so desperate to get it back. Leah's eyes narrowed. Let's bring this whole thing down. As they prepared to make their final move, Leah glanced at Amara, who was watching her with wide, trusting eyes. Leah knew she couldn't let her guard down, not until her daughter was safe and justice was served. Justice delivered. The station was a flurry of activity as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Officer Bradley had been isolated, Alan Myers. The handler was in custody, and the critical link between the key and a smuggling operation had been uncovered. But Leah Daniels wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. The situation was far from over, and the danger had not passed. Leah crouched down to Amara's level in the break room, her voice soft yet firm. Amara, I need you to stay with Sergeant Johnson for a little while longer, okay? I'm going to make sure all of this is handled, and then we'll go home. Amara clutched her notebook tightly. Are you going to catch the bad guys? Leah smiled gently, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's face. That's the plan, sweetheart. Stay close to Sergeant Johnson, and don't worry. I'll come get you soon. Amara nodded, her trust in her mother unwavering. Leah stood and exchanged a glance with Johnson. Keep her safe, she said simply. Johnson nodded, his expression resolute. In the conference room, Bradley sat with his arms crossed, his defiance now tinged with fear. He knew the walls were closing in. Marshal Carter stood beside him, flipping through the files that painted a damning picture of Bradley's corruption. Leah entered the room, her commanding presence instantly silencing any protest Bradley might have had. She set a recorder on the table and leaned forward, her piercing gaze locking onto Bradley. Let's cut to the chase, she began. We know about the smuggling ring. We know about the key. And we know you've been helping to cover it up. Bradley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Leah continued, her tone sharp. Alan Myers is in custody. He's already cooperating. It's only a matter of time before he gives us everything we need to bury you. If you want any chance at leniency, now's the time to talk. Bradley glared at her, his bravado wavering. I don't know what you're talking about. Leah smiled coldly, her eyes narrowing. You're a terrible liar, Bradley. Let me paint a picture for you. You targeted my daughter because she found the key you were trying to keep hidden. You arrested her under false pretenses, hoping to retrieve it without drawing attention. But your arrogance blinded you to one simple fact. You underestimated me. Bradley shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead. Here's the deal, Leah said, her voice low and lethal. You cooperate now, or you go down alone. And trust me, your so-called friends won't lift a finger to help you. Bradley's resolve cracked. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Fine, he muttered. I'll talk, but I want a deal. Carter exchanged a glance with Leah. Start talking, and we'll see. Bradley exhaled shakily, his bravado finally giving way. Myers runs the operation. He's got contacts in the black market, people willing to pay millions for stolen artifacts. My job was to keep things quiet on the local level, make sure no one got too close. Leah's eyes narrowed. And the key? Bradley hesitated. It's part of a lockbox at a private bank. Myers used it to store documents. Proof of transactions, names of buyers, everything. If that box gets opened, the whole operation goes down. Leah leaned back, satisfied. Where's the second key? The one that completes the lock. Bradley swallowed hard. Myers has it. He keeps it with him at all times. Leah exchanged a look with Carter. Then it's time we had a chat with Myers. In the holding area, Alan Myers sat in a metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table. He glared at the two federal agents standing across from him, but his confidence was clearly shaken. Carter placed the phone they had confiscated earlier on the table. This is quite the treasure trove, Myers. Call logs, messages, transaction details. It's all here. You might as well save us the trouble and tell us everything. Myers smirked, though it lacked conviction. You think you got me figured out. You don't even know the half of it. Leah stepped forward, her presence radiating authority. What we know is that you're finished. The key we have, combined with the evidence in your lockbox, is enough to dismantle your entire operation. You're cornered, Myers. Make this easy on yourself. Myers hesitated, his confidence faltering. He leaned back, his cuffed hands tugging slightly against the restraints. What do you want? The second key, Leah said firmly. Where is it? Myers laughed dryly. You think I'd just hand it over? That box is the only leverage I've got. Leah's gaze didn't waver. Leverage only works if you're in control. Right now, you have none. So I'll ask again, where is the key? Myers studied her, searching for any sign of weakness. He found none. Finally, he sighed. It's in my jacket. Inside pocket. Carter nodded to one of the agents, who retrieved the jacket from the evidence locker. Inside, they found a small ornate key, the twin to the one Amara had discovered. Leah held it up, her satisfaction evident. Thank you for your cooperation, Myers. Enjoy the rest of your life in federal custody. With both keys in their possession, Leah and Carter coordinated with a specialized team to secure the safety deposit box. Inside, they found a trove of incriminating documents, records of transactions, lists of buyers, and even photos of the stolen artifacts. The evidence was undeniable. Within hours, warrants were issued, and several high-profile arrests were made. The smuggling ring was dismantled, its web of corruption exposed. Later that evening, Leah sat beside Amara on their living room couch. The events of the day had been harrowing, but for the first time in hours, they could finally breathe. Amara rested her head against her mother's shoulder, clutching her notebook tightly. Did you catch the bad guys, Mom? Amara asked softly. Leah smiled, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. We did, sweetheart, and it's all thanks to you. Amara looked up at her, her eyes wide with wonder. Me. Leah nodded. You were brave, smart, and observant. That key you found helped bring down some very bad people. Amara beamed, her fear from earlier replaced with pride. I'm glad I found it. Leah wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. Me too, baby. Me too. As they sat together, the weight of the day lifted, replaced by the comforting knowledge that justice had been served, and that their bond was stronger than ever. Later that night, after Amara had fallen asleep, Leah stood in the quiet of their home, staring out the window into the darkened street. The events of the day replayed in her mind. The moment she had seen her daughter's face light up with relief when she arrived at the station, the tension in Bradley's office, and the final confrontation with Alan Myers. Each memory was a mix of triumph and lingering unease. Leah's phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up, recognizing Marshall Carter's number. Carter, she answered, her voice low to avoid waking Amara. It's done, Carter said on the other end. Myers and Bradley are in custody. The rest of the operation is being mopped up as we speak. The evidence from the safety deposit box is rock solid. They won't see the light of day for a very long time. Leah let out a small sigh of relief. Good. What about the artifacts? They'll be returned to their rightful owners once the investigation is fully closed, Carter replied. You did good today, Daniels. Your instincts and persistence made all the difference. Leah smiled faintly. It wasn't just me. Amara was the one who found that key. If it weren't for her curiosity, we might not have cracked this case. Carter chuckled softly. You've got a remarkable kid. She takes after you. Leah's smile grew. Thanks, Carter. Keep me posted if anything changes. Will do, Carter replied. And Daniels, get some rest. You've earned it. As the call ended, Leah placed the phone back on the counter and leaned against it, her thoughts drifting to Amara. Her daughter's courage and resilience had shone brightly in the face of adversity, a reflection of the values Leah had worked so hard to instill in her. The following morning, Amara woke to the smell of pancakes wafting from the kitchen. She padded out of her room in her bunny slippers and found Leah flipping pancakes at the stove, a plate of fresh fruit already on the counter. "Morning, sleepyhead," Leah said with a warm smile as she turned to greet her daughter. Amara yawned and climbed onto a stool at the kitchen island. "Morning, Mom. Are the bad guys still in jail?" Leah chuckled as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Yes, they are. And they're going to stay there for a long time." Amara picked up her fork, her curiosity sparking again. "What's going to happen to the key?" Leah sat down beside her, sipping her coffee. "The key will be kept in evidence for now. It's part of a bigger case, so it'll help make sure everyone involved gets the punishment they deserve." Amara nodded thoughtfully, chewing her pancake. "I'm glad I found it, but I didn't like being at the police station." Leah reached over, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's. "I know, sweetheart. That was a scary thing to go through. But you were so brave. You stood your ground, told the truth, and helped me do my job." Amara looked up, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You're the best mom ever." Leah smiled, her heart swelling with love. "And you're the best daughter. I'm so proud of you." As the day went on, life began to return to normal. The case had been handed over to federal authorities, and the media buzz surrounding the smuggling ring's takedown began to spread. Leah received calls from her colleagues, all congratulating her on the successful operation. But for Leah, the real victory was sitting at home with Amara, knowing her daughter was safe and sound. She had faced a moment of unimaginable fear, but it had only strengthened her resolve to protect her little girl and to continue fighting for justice, no matter the cost. As the sun set that evening, Leah and Amara sat on the porch together, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Amara leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, her notebook resting on her lap. "Do you think I'll ever find another key like that?" Amara asked softly. Leah smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Maybe. But if you do, you know exactly what to do." Amara grinned. "Give it to you so you can catch more bad guys." "Exactly," Leah said, laughing. "Teamwork makes the dream work." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the sky, their bond unshakable, and their hearts full of gratitude for the strength they had found in each other.